Hi everybody, this is a follow-up to my video last week about my journey into video gaming as a noob dad and how I quickly became obsessed and went deeper and deeper down several rabbit holes. And in that video, I teased the possibility of a kind of tour of the handheld gaming devices that I have accumulated throughout this hobby. And so that's what this is today. When it comes to hobbies, I do tend to go hard. I filled my home with Lego. I filled it with physical media, DVDs, then Blu-rays, and now 4Ks. And maybe I'll talk more about those things some other time. But over the last 4 years, I have accumulated a mound of games, physical games, digital games, and especially gaming devices. So I want to give a little tour of the devices in the order that I accumulated them, which kind of tells a little bit of the story of this excursion of mine, from console gaming to emulation to bigger, deeper, crazier emulation, and ultimately into PC gaming as well. So as mentioned in that video, this is the Switch Lite that I purchased in 2019. This was my first new gaming device in many years, and this is where I sheepishly made my way back into the world of video games and initially thought I'd made a huge mistake. Of course, now, a few years later, I have accumulated more devices. I bought my daughter a Switch Lite and then another Switch. I've had a couple of Switches since, and now I have this Switch OLED, the OLED screen, and then I have, these are just some funky, more ergonomic and fun Joy-Con controllers that I use with my Switch. And this is currently my Switch. And also, I'll just say, despite what we're about to see throughout this whole journey, this is still my most played device, is the Switch. It's just comfortable. Everything works. You know, we'll talk about this as we go, but as you delve into emulation, it is a very it's rewarding for what you can achieve, but it's so punishing because everything has to be configured. Everything has to be meticulously set up and maintained. You have to name files and put them in the folder and use USB to copy them to the device, and you have an SD card and then the card is corrupt, and then so it's very, very trying. So I find that I always come back to the Switch. It's not the most powerful device, but it always works. And you've of course got the Nintendo library, and you've got great indie games, and then you've got crummy ports of some bigger games that, you know, some are better than others. We'll talk about those maybe some other day. So catching up with Nintendo games on my Switch is what ultimately led me down the rabbit hole of emulation, which started as kind of a confusing disaster, but eventually took me to new heights of spending and acquisition, as I figured out eventually what I was doing with emulating at first retro games and then doing some higher end emulation as well. So my first dedicated emulation device was the Anbernic RG351P. This horizontally orientated device can play anything from, you know, the early 8-bit systems, NES, to, of course, Super Nintendo, all the way up to, on here, PlayStation 1, Dreamcast, and Nintendo DS, and a few smaller, little lighter, older PC ports and things like that. So even though the horizontal orientation of a device like the 351P makes more sense ergonomically, there's something about the vertical orientation of the original Game Boy, which I never owned, had a certain nostalgia and draw to it. So I accumulated many more devices, including this one. And I don't remember what brand this is or what it is. I think it's called an IPS 300, but I don't remember who makes it. And essentially, it's just another emulation device that can play up to about PlayStation 1. But this is an opportune time to discuss the difference between certain emulation devices. So the Anbernic devices are quite popular, and they have a lot of community contribution, a lot of community software that's made. So all of these devices will come with software loaded onto them, usually some kind of a Linux application on a crappy generic SD card with lots of games, which is illegal to sell games, but these things come generally from China, and they come loaded up with really weird versions. Many of these devices that I have bought that have shipped from Hong Kong come with stock cards filled with often South American versions of the ROMs, of the actual game files, and I just don't use them. So my favorite thing to do with these small devices is to use custom firmware, which is open source firmware, software that someone in the fan community has created, using something called Arc OS on this 351P, which has a really nice interface and a lot of nice features. But this one, the IPS 300, it is still stuck with the firmware that came with it, and it's not very user-friendly, and so I don't play this one very often. My favorite Anbernic device ended up being this one, the RG351V, which is just like an evolution of that other device, but into a vertical Game Boy-like format. And this is one of my very favorite emulation devices. I'm using something called Amber Elec, which is just another fan-made, another homebrewed custom firmware made by a developer, a fan developer, just for this device. I haven't gotten to my favorite small handheld, though. That would be my most recent acquisition in this form factor, which is something called the Miyoo Mini Plus. Let me turn this on. I've had at least 3 or 4 more devices than I've shown you that I've either given away to friends or they broke. But of these small Chinese devices, the Miyoo Mini Plus, there was something called the Miyoo Mini, which was incredibly popular, which was even smaller than this, if you can imagine it, which is no longer made because I think the screens became difficult to source. But this Miyoo Mini Plus, which just came out this year or late last year, and has custom software called Onion OS, is my very favorite of the small pocketable emulation devices by far. This is the one I go to. I feel almost like this particular journey is done. You'll see that there's other devices and other types of emulation, but as far as this kind of playing retro 1632-bit retro games on a pocketable device, this Miyoo Mini Plus is my favorite one. So this next device is my one foray into the world of Android emulation, and this is the AYN, or AYN, I don't know how you say the company name, the AYN Odin, and this is a sort of in a PSP, PS Vita, or maybe Switch Lite kind of a format, and it is an Android device, and it can emulate up to all of the retro systems, of course, using some of the same software as those smaller ones. But this guy can go up to about PlayStation 2. Not with perfect results. You're going to have to mess around, and you're going to have to do some configuration. But I'm using a custom platform here called Daijishu, which is a really nice emulation, another one of these open source emulation operating systems, which lets you manage a whole bunch of different systems into one experience. So this one is great. I have made modifications to it because the sticks that come with it are too flat and they feel almost like just sliding little touch pads, and then also I replaced the face buttons because they were just way too shallow. So I found so I did have to make modifications to this physically. I found an Etsy seller who makes buttons and things specifically for this device. That said, I really want to call this one of my favorites because when it's cooking, it's cooking, and it's really great, especially for PSP emulation. You can up-res, you can increase the resolution to 1080p, I believe, with PSP games on this device, and they're a whole lot of fun to play. But ultimately, I find that Android is just not my preferred platform for a device. It's just kind of buggy and shallow, and it does weird things, and it just quits on you. And so, as much as I like this device, I had to mod it a lot, and then I also just don't like the platform, the native platform of Android. So I can't fully recommend the AYN Odin. It's a good device. There is an Odin 2 coming, which I hope will improve some of these things. But as long as it's an Android device, I don't think that's going to be my go-to. And speaking of buggy and shallow, I want to talk about Windows emulation. But before I do that, I just want to take a moment to mention that one of my very favorite novelty emulation devices is, it's not booting, is this modded PlayStation Vita. Now, it has a shell over it that I got that makes it a little more ergonomic, and I should have charged this before. I'll charge it up and do some B-roll maybe so I can show you what it looks like. But modding a Vita, which can then play any PlayStation 1, PSP, or PlayStation Vita game, plus RetroArch and a whole lot of other little ports and surprises. Surprisingly great emulation device. I'm finding that it's not entirely dependable. It's crashing a lot. That might have to do with the card that I had to use to mod it. It's an old refurbished device. That might be it. It was a lot of fun to work on, very satisfying to mod it, but I almost never play it. And the loud fan is already screaming out. Yes, I did also try my hand at Windows emulation. As much as I don't enjoy Android as a platform, of course, I can't say that I'm a big fan of Windows in general as a platform for gaming, except that every there's a world of PC games, and of course they play best on Windows, but it's still Windows. And you put it into a touchscreen device, a handheld device, and it's asking me for my PIN, which is insane. There is no PIN, and no matter how many times I tell it that there's not. All right. This device is by far the most expensive device I own, and the biggest regret probably of this entire journey. This is a handheld Windows console called the Aya Neo. It is a very powerful PC, and it certainly does what it says. It plays PC games. It plays Switch or Battle.net or just self-executable Windows games. It is also a touchscreen Windows device. And particularly of interest to me as a noob gaming dad, because it's Windows, you can also run mods and trainers. You can run things like WeMod and Plitch so that you can have a little extra help in your games. And so for a while, this helped me catch up with PC games. I caught up with console games with the Switch, and classic games through emulation. And then this let me play some PC games, some things that I hadn't been able to play elsewhere. But ultimately it is a Windows device, and it started to drive me crazy, and it eats batteries. And so you'll see that I moved on to a much more formidable platform to play PC games. But before I move on from Windows, I did want to mention this thing. This is a mini PC from a company called Minis Forum. And this thing is a very powerful little PC, which makes an excellent all-in-one emulation console for my TV. So by and large, I'm showing you handheld devices here, but I'll get some B-roll of this thing running. It is a Windows PC, so it has all those bugaboos, but it's able to play. I've been able to get everything up to Wii U. Some people, I think, can even emulate Switch on here. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't emulate a system that is currently on the retail market. That would be a horrible crime. But I have gotten Wii U, PlayStation 3 to run on this. And when the Windows installation started to drive me crazy, I discovered something great, a Linux-based platform called Batacera, which you can put on a dual boot. And so you can just run this thing with Linux and have no Windows at all, and the performance is so much better because it's not doing all the stuff Windows does in the background. So this thing is great. I don't play games on the TV all that much. I have been playing my PlayStation 5 a little more since Diablo 4 came out, but this thing is great fun, and having basically every classic console up to PlayStation 3 and Wii U connected to my television is lovely. Finally, then, we come to the Steam Deck, Valve's entry into the handheld gaming market. This is basically a Steam console where you can play PC games on the Steam platform in this huge but portable form factor. It is Linux based, so the disappointment for me was that there's not yet a good solution for trainers and mods and kind of extra things. There are an increasing number of apps and things available. This is one. As a platform, Steam Deck and Steam OS is like out of control, and I'm sure the fans are working on it. Also, there's compatibility issues. You know, you have to work harder to get games running on here if they're not natively supported by Steam, but you can do it. It is also an incredible emulation device. I have everything up to Wii U and PlayStation 3 running on the Steam Deck, and they perform brilliantly. I've caught up with so many games on here, not to mention, AAA PC games and indie games, things that, there's lots of interesting indie games that are not on the Switch eShop, which you can enjoy here on the Steam Deck. I'm a huge fan of it. It has its limitations because of Linux, but that also means it performs better, so it's a trade-off. So that's my tour. I was a little scatterbrained and I didn't get technical. Let me know in the comments if you want me to get any more specific about any of these, if you have any questions. There are better channels than mine out there for technical help getting this stuff running, but I'd be happy to share my experience fighting with these devices and getting them to do what I want to do. The ones I showed you, to varying degrees of success, are the ones that have worked out. And to recap, my Switch is still my most played device by far. I will play that later. I'll play that tonight. I'll play Pikmin 4 for a couple hours later. My favorite of the small devices would be the Miyoo Mini Plus. This is my go-to retro gaming, pixel-based gaming device. I've been playing Super Mario RPG and Crash Bandicoot 2, two great games on here lately. And then, of course, as far as emulation goes, the Steam Deck is the winner in terms of capability and just ease of use, having everything in one library. It takes a lot of work to set it up. You have to switch over to what's called desktop mode, and you have to configure things. But once you do, it just works the way it's supposed to, and it's fantastic. Also want to give one more shout out to the mini PC. It's amazing what is happening now with PCs. I've never had a PC that could run video games. I always have a PC that's like 5 years old and can barely render the videos that I need to make. So having a little mini PC that's stronger than my main desktop that I can run on my 4K TV and play all these retro games with an Xbox controller, it is fantastic. So again, let me know in the comments if you want to know any more about anything specific here. And I will be back soon to talk more about software. I think I'm going to talk some more about games and genres and how I discover games, how I keep up with games and decide what to play. And then I'll give you some recommendations for things in various genres that I enjoy. Thank you for your time. I will talk to you again soon. Josh out.